Hey friends, it's me, Pastor Doug, with another word of encouragement for the day for today, Wednesday, June 2nd. And today's word comes out of the book of Ephesians, chapter 1, verses 21 and 22. And it's actually a passage that we've been reading a lot. If you're a part of our church, Ventura Missionary Church, we've been reading this passage pretty much every single Sunday. It's kind of been the foundation for this series that we're in called Not My King. And we've been exploring this idea that if Jesus is my king, well, then fill in the blank is not my king. Jealousy, greed, pride, all of these things are not my king. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not even really my king. Even though I live in a hyper-individualistic society that tells me that I'm the center of the universe, if I'm a follower of Jesus, then really, he's my king. He's the ultimate authority in my life. And so I want to read to you this passage that we've been reading, and I'm reading it out of the New Living Translation. And in it, Paul writes this. He says, now he, and he's talking about Christ. So he says, now Christ is far above any ruler. Now he could have just stopped there, right? But he goes on and he says, he's far above any ruler or authority or power or leader. And then just to make sure that he's covered all his bases, he says, or anything else, right? So again, he says this, now Christ is far above any ruler or authority or power or leader or anything else. Not only in this world, Paul says, but in the world to come, God has put all things under, subject to, in submission to the authority of Christ, and has made him, Christ, head over all things for the benefit of the church. Friends, I don't know where you work or where you worked or where you went to school, but typically most organizations have some sort of hierarchy. We're used to that, right? You know, at a school, there's the students, and then there's the teachers, and then there's the vice principal and the principal. But even beyond that, there's the superintendent, and it kind of goes all the way up, right? Maybe you work in a place that was like that. You know, there's your manager or your boss, but then that boss has a boss, and that boss has a boss. Years ago, I had the privilege of working at Big Five Sporting Goods here in town as an assistant manager, and I worked for my good friend Chip, who's actually still there, and he was my boss. But every once in a while, there was a guy that came in that was the district manager, and he was my boss's boss. And then every once in a while, there was a guy that came in that was the divisional manager, and he was my boss's boss's boss, right? And so we're used to those sort of hierarchies within a workplace or within a school. Well, that's basically the kind of language that Paul is using here to describe Christ's supremacy over everything. He's basically saying, listen, you can track all the way up. Your boss's 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 boss. Yeah, Christ is still over him or her. Well, okay, well, what about my boss's 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 boss? And Paul is saying, yeah, still the head over everything, over all leaders, authority, power, everything else. And so, friends, it's so important for us to sort of go through our lives thinking in those terms that ultimately, yes, I have responsibility for my life. Yes, I have decisions that I have to make, all of those things. But ultimately, Christ has the authority in my life. Ultimately, Christ is my king. Ultimately, Christ is far over and above everything. And that supremacy, that idea of his supremacy, helps me live in right order, right? Instead of trying to be the king over my life, the ruler over my life, I live my life in submission to, subject to the ultimate authority of Christ. And friends, I've been following Jesus for almost 30 years. And I can tell you that living in submission to Christ is far better than any other alternative I've ever seen. So friends, remember that. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.